I love driving in the winter. The weather is chilly, and there is rarely any traffic on the highways. I can just peacefully ride my car, listening to my favorite music. I used to find excuses to go on such late-night rides, until one incident changed my perspective. Almost about 20 years ago, I was driving home from a New Year's party that ended late. I wasn't a family member, but I was invited to do some fun gigs to keep the audience pumped up. I was driving south on a major interstate highway, and it was relatively empty at about 3:30 a.m. or so. I had expected to see fewer cars, considering the time of the night, but that night there were lesser cars on the road than I even expected. At one point, in the Narrows, the retaining walls on each side get extremely high as the highway curves underneath the overpasses. And this route wasn't unfamiliar to me, so I kept driving at a good speed, despite the twisty and curvy road. I was alone in the car, and out of nowhere, a young woman jumped down from the retaining wall onto the highway and landed directly in front of my car. I hit the brakes as hard as I could, and the car came to an abrupt stop and almost nearly slammed into her. She looked up, unfazed by the near-death encounter, and rushed to my passenger door. Now I agree that it was a little careless of me not to have my car doors locked, but I would have locked them if I was driving slowly or was coming to a gradual stop where I could have expected someone jumping up on my car. But anyway, my car door wasn't locked, and the girl got inside and sat beside me. She was looking tremendously terrified. Not that I asked her, but she looked somewhat between 18 and 24 years old. She had long blonde hair, and her clothes looked a tad bit dirt-stained. I'm calling it stained because it did not look like she was homeless, but like she'd fallen down a few times. She claimed that she needed to call her mom. I tried to calm her down and began moving a little back down the highway, and I noticed some movement behind my car. Almost about 40 to 60 feet away, I saw a figure of a man jump down onto the highway and rush toward my car. I saw all of this out of my rearview window. I didn't mention this to her so as to not panic her more than what she already was. And she didn't look back or see the other person. I have heard these incidents where some random girl would show up in the middle of a highway, asking for help, and when the car stops to help her, some people jump out of hiding to hijack the car. The girl is just a trick to slow down and stop an unwary traveler. So I was cautious of this possibility too. But the problem with such hijackers is that the girl just stalls the conversation so as to buy time for the hidden gang to appear. This girl was not wasting a single moment. As I mentioned before, she jumped ahead of my car, risking her own life, and then got inside at the earliest. Also, when I saw the dude behind, she wasn't even aware that the man was coming for her. I was in no mood to confront the guy. I mean, he might have some weapon, and I might get killed. So I floored my car and gunned ahead. I sped up and went about 6 or 7 exits south. She kept repeating over and over that she just needed to call her mom. But I was helpless about this. This happened way before smartphones were common. In fact, this was before most people even had cell phones. So I calmed her down and told her that I would take her to one of the 24-hour grocery stores, and she could call her mom from their landline. I asked her if she needed money for a payphone. She did not reply. I asked her what was wrong and how she got into this situation. She said nothing other than,
"I just need to call my mom."
I pulled up to the very first grocery store that I saw and stopped. She got out quickly, but was not running towards it. Maybe she did not want to scare off the grocery store guys by charging toward them at almost 3 or 4 in the night. She got to the door and then ducked into the grocery store. She didn't say a single word to me, or even bothered to look back. I pulled into the gas station across the street and called 911. I narrated the entire story and let them know that the young woman was inside the grocery store and also provided a description of her. I told them that I had no idea as to what had even happened. I mentioned to them about the figure behind us on the highway. But I could not provide many details to them, as all I could see was a silhouette. In retrospect, that sudden turn of events really made me super uneasy. To this day, I don't know what happened to the girl. And I hope she was fine once she got inside the store, as I never saw her come out. a police vehicle drove past me while I was on my way back to my original route. So I was assured that the situation will be taken care of. I think I did the right thing, and I would have tried to do more, but she seemed emotionally fragile and somewhat afraid of me, since I too am a guy. So I wanted her to just be able to get to wherever she needed to be. Now when I drive on highways, I ensure that there are no humans waiting to jump in front of my car, that too out of nowhere. Now let's hop onto story number 2, but before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. My highway horror story is not unexplainable as such, but scary enough to make me feel chills run down my spine. This happened to me maybe like 2 to 3 years ago. I used to throw newspapers for a modern-day newspaper. And if you know anything about modern-day newspaper delivery, it is not even close to anything like the typical little teen throwing a small bundle in the morning, just before school for his lunch money. I threw somewhat over 1,500 papers every night. I'm not even exaggerating. 1,500 newspapers. And I had to do it at night. So my shift started at night, as in I had to pick everyone's newspapers up at midnight and throw them at their doorsteps right until 5:30 or 6 in the morning. I had to roll them all by myself, also then stuff advertisements inside them, and the typical other works. It is a terribly arduous job, but it pays well above minimum wage, especially when you have a large route like the one I had. Anyway, one night I was throwing newspapers in a little place called Holt, somewhere in Missouri. It was about 45 minutes from Kansas City limits. I was throwing these out of my window when suddenly I realized that the same pair of headlights kept on passing me for a couple of times. It was too dark out, and that too in the middle of nowhere, to make out the vehicle well, but it was no doubt an SUV or Suburban. I stopped my car and watched it as it rolled past me, and went a good quarter mile down the road, before it made a large awkward U-turn back around. It did the same thing a few more times before I finished my papers on that stretch of the road, and turned around. This road was a completely flat and straight road for several miles ahead, with no light pollution at all. Amongst ourselves, we called them bitch roads, because you had to drive so far, only to throw a handful of papers, which honestly never felt worth the effort. As I was driving back, I realized the blinding headlights of the vehicle pestering me were no longer moving toward my own. They had stopped in the middle of the road. With barely enough room to drive past them, I pressed the horn and screamed a few abusive words as I flew past them. And I think I'll forever regret doing that. I was under the impression that it was just a couple hillbillies drunk and wanting to start trouble. Even going 50 miles per hour past them and going ways down the road, I heard their tires screech and the engine rev whatever it was. They had it souped up. Quickly, the situation turned shitty, like extremely shitty. They got on my trail within seconds, and my poor little beater wouldn't be able to outrun them even if it grew a new engine. They rammed my vehicle's rear end, and the unmistakable pop of gunshots went off. They shot several times, out of which one bullet busted out my back window and whizzed past my head. In a panic mode, I did the only thing that came to mind and screeched Tokyo Drift style into a farmer's field adjacent to his gravel driveway. The truck followed me there too, but seemed to hit something hard and went careening past the driveway into the other half of the field. I gunned it down to this guy's house. I had never met him before, and he was like a perfect stranger. I hauled my butt out of my car and began banging on the door like a madman, hoping and praying that I don't get shot by either the person in the killer mobile or the farmer I am waking up in the middle of the night. The vehicle wasn't very far away from me when almost every light in the house turned on at once. The vehicle screeched to a stop and pulled around. I saw that it is in fact an old-style Suburban with massive wheels and no license plates on it. A large burly man wearing nothing but some boxers and several other guys greet me at the door, one brandishing a rifle. In the end, it all worked out. By chance, the man was getting married in the morning, and all of his buddies were over at his place for his bachelor party. Thank God not all of them got blackout drunk. I filed a police report, yet nothing ever came of it. No other reports ever came of a beat-up Suburban with no license plates. I started carrying my pistol in my delivery car after that. My vehicle had 7 bullet holes, and the back bumper of my car was missing. The thing that messes me up the most is that we never found my bumper anywhere. As if it just vanished into thin air. They rammed it, and it disappeared. Maybe they took it as a souvenir. No doubt, because for a brief moment there, I really thought I was going to be murdered. In 1996, my mother and I were driving to Montana from my aunt's wedding in the last week of December. We were driving from Colorado to Montana. I was around 5 or 6 years old, and I was sitting in my car in the passenger seat. We were in a fairly good blue rental car for the trip, because our family car definitely couldn't make the drive that far. It was almost after midnight when it got dead quiet on this stretch of forested highway. This highway was literally with no lights or houses for miles. We were in between 2 towns, somewhere just before the Montana state line. My mom was going about 65 miles per hour on one of those thin, winding roads without a care in the world, when she suddenly notices a gigantic buck that was standing in the middle of the damn road. She swerved the car as quickly as she could, but the huge antlered buck jumped in the same direction, causing us to plow into it. Its body spun down the left side of the car, knocking off the mirror and denting the hell out of the door, all while releasing a barbaric forest animal death cry that was unlike anything I've ever heard since. My mom was obviously shaking, and she sped off without stopping because, firstly, what if it was still alive? And secondly, we gotta find a phone and report it, right? It took us about 20 minutes to get to the next town to find a bar. My mom ran in with me, both of us frantically crying, and all these burly men jumped up to help my mom. I presume that they thought one of us was injured or in some sort of danger. My mom relays the events through tears, and then they all look at each other asking if she kept the buck in the car. My 5-foot-tall mom told them no, and clarified that she did not drag a buck with trophy-sized antlers into the car with her 4-year-old child. They all started high-fiving and asked her for the closest mile marker to where she hid it, because that was supposedly good meat. My mom used the bar's landline phone to call the cops, and when she gave them the same story, they also asked if she kept it for meat. She figured that country people in Montana are starving weirdos. She also realized that we should push through with our journey, because we only had a few hours of driving left. We got to my uncle's house around 3:30 a.m. and immediately went to bed. Just after 7 a.m., someone starts banging on my uncle's front door like they have some metallic fists. He opened the door and it was the cops. They had gotten about 24 calls in the previous hour, ever since the sun came up, reporting about a murder car in my uncle's driveway. It was our white rental, dotted with deer fur, and absolutely caked in blood from the grill to the trunk, with the left side of the car dented like a tune can. We had no idea that we were driving around in a car that looked like it belonged to some horror movie. My mom was horrified, and she told the cops about the deer and her call to the cops a couple of 100 miles behind, and how scary the entire incident was. The cops dead-ass looked at my mom and asked her if anyone had claimed the deer for meat. We've not been back to Montana since that trip, and neither do we intend to visit it again. This one incident happened to me almost a year and a half back. One night at around midnight, I was returning home after a party, and it was like super late. I got home after long hours of driving and was ready to crash on my bed. I parked my car and got home to finish off the basic household chores. As I was about to take out the trash, a person pulled into my driveway in an SUV. My driveway is a little large, and it kinda loops around the property. He had parked with his headlights set to bright, and the face of the car pointed toward my house's front door. There was just a locked screen door between us, since my front door was open. When this happened, it was close to midnight, and since he parked so strangely, I grabbed one of my handguns before heading to the door to simply double-check that it was locked. I considered closing the actual door, but if they were there to rob me, they already knew that I was home. Also, alternatively, there was also a possibility that they could just be in need of some sort of help. I set my handgun next to the front door, close enough that I could grab it in under a second, but also out of view from the outside. A man stepped out of the SUV, which caused the interior lights of the car to turn on, and through the bright headlights, I could just barely see that he wasn't alone in the car. The man approached my front door and greeted me. I asked why he was in front of my home, and he said he was looking for a friend's house. I advised him that he wasn't at the right place, and that he should continue on down the road to find the residential area, which he was probably looking for. He claimed that he came from that same direction, and reiterated that he was looking for a friend's house. He had a smartphone in his hand, so I suggested that he use it to call his friend for directions. He gave me an excuse about how his friend wouldn't pick up. So I suggested that he typed his friend's address into Google Maps and followed the directions to get to his place. He said he tried that, but he couldn't get it to work properly. He asked me to come outside of my house at midnight to help him type an address into Google Maps. Obviously, I refused. I said, "Look, buddy, it's almost midnight. I don't know you, and you're insistent that I unlock my door and come outside to help you, which might be something that a toddler would do." He responded,
Hey man, don't call the police. I'm a military vet, and I just need some help. So can you please come outside and help me?
Now, I feel I should state here that up to this point, the police had not even been mentioned at all. So obviously, telling me not to call the police made me want to call the cops more than ever. I put one hand on my gun before informing him that I would be calling the police, and that he should leave before that happens. He started to protest, but I pulled out the gun and used the side of the barrel to close my actual door. I just wanted to show him that I was armed, but I didn't want to escalate things further by pointing a gun at him. He fled while I called the police, but nothing ever came of it. Then almost 7 months later, my neighbor ran into a similar situation where an SUV and multiple men arrived at his door, only that he was asleep when they showed up. A man rang his doorbell close to midnight. He got up and opened his front door without really looking to see who was there. As soon as he did, a man that had been standing to the side of the door out of sight pointed a shotgun to his head and walked him back into his own house. He sat there for hours with a shotgun pointed at his head, while multiple men robbed him. They didn't shoot him, but they did clean him out. He lost everything: jewelry, cash, credit cards, guns, TV, etc. They even made him give his PIN number and drove to go test it while he was still being held at gunpoint. I don't know for sure that they were the same people, but it sounded like a properly choreographed plan by these goons to loot people. Thank you so much for listening to these stories. Now that you have made it till here, I want you to choose the topic for the next video. Comment down below and let me know your favorite topics for a horror podcast. Also, I'd love it if you could bring more horror story lovers to our Mr. Scares horror community.